So I'm Dave Manzo. I was the former president of Compass for 20 years, 1984 to 2004. My roots are in direct service. I was a caseworker. I would have been, back in the day, I would have been working for you if you had been here. And that was the beginning of my career here. And I watched this organization grow tremendously, primarily because of some extraordinary people who were here at Compass. And Margy is on that list. Want to say a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. Sure, Dave.
Then I'm going to dive in a bit more.
Okay, I'm sure you will. My name is Margy Nicholson. I am the Director of Community Services. Dave Manzo hired me, and I started back on February 25th of 1985. I attended Boston College, so we had a lot of things to talk about during our interview. And I'm still here today, although retiring at the end of the month.
So Margy, Compass in 1985, very, very different than
Very
today.
different.
Can you talk a little bit about the differences?
When I took over as Director of Community Services, we were dealing with only then it was 5 Boston DCF area offices. They now have only 4.
Oh, I'm going to push you back even further than that. Because I think when you started,
That's correct.
it was DYS and foster care.
Yes, it was. Sorry, I completely went over that year. Yes, I was hired as a foster care coordinator. All of the foster homes were on the South Shore, where I had never been. I go to New Hampshire for my vacations, but I very confidently told John Lydon, I remember, that it was nothing that a map couldn't show me.
So I think at the time you had to recruit foster parents, make sure they were trained. I think we probably had 40 or so foster homes at the height of your time. And it was a little bit crazy because, if I remember correctly, the foster homes were being used as detention beds for the Department of Youth Services.
Yes.
Which was not the best way to use foster homes.
It was not. And we did not always get a full history on the kids that were placed in the foster homes. They tend to leave out the scarier details. So yes, it was quite a learning experience.
And there were some dramatic stories. We had
Yes.
kids who were dropped off at foster care and a well-trained foster home, and knowing that they had a court date in front of them, decided that they might take something on the way back to Boston.
Absolutely.
So it was a very different time.
Yes, and the foster homes really went from Brockton all the way down to Marion and down to the Cape. So these kids were pretty creative in finding their way back to Boston without much in terms of public transportation, but they always seemed to make it.
So your beginning with Compass, it had its rough moments.
It did. And I had no experience at all, so I didn't know any better, which was probably just as well.
So I'm going to roll you back a little bit further on this because
Okay.
There's something in you that drew you to this work. There's something before Compass. What drew you to this work? What in your background, in your family, you always talked about your mom, like what was it that drew you to this work?
I think it was a couple of things. I'm the youngest of 7. I always told my staff that I was a social worker long before I got my degree. One of my older brothers was also a social worker, and a good friend of the family, I learned years later, was actually a former client of my brother's. He used to work with Chin's kids out of Somerville. And he had taken this young man under his wing, and he was a long-term friend. And that really impressed me. And that was the role that I wanted to play in other kids' lives.
How about your family values? What were they?
I had the benefit of growing up in a family where it wasn't, would I go to college? It was where I would go to college. And I wanted to be able to provide those same opportunities for the kids that were not offered those same opportunities. I saw the value of education, and I wanted to pass that on in the work that I did.
Why BC?
It's a family tradition. 5 of 7 of us went to Boston College. I actually was only the second year of the 3-2 program, so I did my undergrad and graduate in 5 years.
So the 3-2 program was a pretty innovative program at the time.
It was.
You went and you got your undergrad and your master's in a 5-year period.
Right.
It was a lot of work to do that.
It was. My uncle was also the rector of BC Law School. Thankfully, it wasn't until after I left Boston College that they offered the MSW JD degree, because
maybe we wouldn't have seen you?
that might have been, I think that would have been my preference, the preference of my dad, who was also an attorney.
So how did you find out about Compass?
Through a tiny little ad in the Boston Globe.
Oh, you didn't read about it online?
I didn't.
There was no internet.
There was no internet back then. And I joke about it with my staff now. I remember having to handwrite progress reports, and I would hand them to be typed. They would be handed back to me. I would correct them again.
To make sure the grammar was correct.
To make sure the grammar was correct. Thank you.
Because right back here it says, I'm silently correcting your grammar.
Yes. My mother was a tyrant with my papers while at Boston College, and I always tell my staff that if you think I'm tough, you never met her. And I also had an aunt who was a principal of several schools, so when my mom passed, my aunt took over. So
when you came to Compass that first day, we were located?
In the Roxbury Boys and Girls Club.
Very odd.
It was very odd. My parents weren't thrilled to hear that I would be working every day in Dudley Square in Roxbury, but they trusted me enough.
And it was pretty rough and tumble in the early
It was
80s.
rough and tumble, hence our 4 o'clock end of day.
The side story on that was I went out to start my car, the battery was gone, and I said, oh, I think we have to change our work hours and leave a little bit earlier.
Especially after daylight savings.
Especially after daylight savings.
Yes.
So we were small.
Very.
But you had this unbelievable ability to create a family out of your team. You might not think that, but somehow you, in the very beginning, how many people did you work with?
Just 1, really.
Right.
2 at the most.
Right. It was really, really small.
It was
there
very
was nothing
small.
there, but somehow you got something out of that group. Well, so what is it that made you treat your staff the way you treat your staff? Because you treat your staff extraordinarily. You have their back all the time.
I'm not sure they would agree with you
No,
all
they
the
might
time.
not agree with that. But that is what a good mentor is. A good mentor is not always a friend.
Right.
But a good mentor has their back and is always teaching. And that's you.
Right. I think what has made me successful in general in social work is to have high expectations.
Yes.
First of all, of myself. Secondly, of my staff. And thirdly, of the clients and families with whom we work.
Yes.
So I think that's a really integral part.
Yes.
I also think,
That's integrity.
I think it is.
Oh, that's integrity, absolutely.
And I don't know if you remember my old car, but I used to have buttons on my dashboard. And it was a conversation starter for the kids that I was transporting on a Friday afternoon, from Dorchester down to the Cape. And one of them I remember was potential bag lady. And I never saw myself as being different than the clients and families I was asked to work with, except for the circumstance of my birth. And I still believe that now. And I think the families have always known that I do not sit in judgment of them or anyone else.
Right. I mean, that is you. I mean, that is such a gift. And a lot of people think of the people they serve as other. And you've never othered people.
No.
You've always embraced them, but held them to your staff and families to a very high expectation.
Yes.
And that's why the stories all come back. I mean, here we are close to your retirement.
Right.
And people will say to you, I remember.
I actually got a text from one of my staff yesterday, and she was doing a home visit at the charter school in Boston, and she said, Margy, I just ran into Shannon Foley,
Yeah.
who worked for me back in the early 2000s, 20 odd years ago. And she ended up following it up with a phone call yesterday afternoon. She's married now, has an 8-year-old daughter, and living in Milton, and wanted to thank me and wish me the best in my retirement.
So
Which was very special.
thinking about people who are supervisors here and thinking about people who do direct care, about people who direct care, what made them really good? What were the key things you looked for when you went to hire somebody?
Not so much the degrees, but the passion.
Okay.
The
Sure. That's you.
comfortability.
Sure.
Their ability to articulate what drew them to the field. I often joke that I went to graduate school with some of the sickest people I had the pleasure to meet, because they were going into social work for all the wrong reasons, to work out their own issues on the backs of their clients. And I wanted to make sure that none of my staff would ever do that. We're all drawn to this field for our own reasons, but they're not always healthy ones.
So you would see passion and potential.
Passion and potential.
What else?
Not saying no.
Okay.
Sure, Margy, I'll try.
Sure.
I don't think I've ever said no to you or to John Lydon when you
Right.
asked me to do anything over the years. And that's always been the Compass mentality.
Yeah. It's a very yes mentality.
Definitely.
So you've had to supervise people. The people you have now as supervisors, what do you look for in them?
Being able to hold people accountable. A lot of staff have difficulty having courageous conversations, crucial conversations.
Difficult conversation.
Difficult conversations. And I know I have gotten better at it over the years. The more I did it, the more comfortable I became. But it's not easy. But if I can't expect my staff to have difficult conversations with one another, I certainly can't trust that they're going to be able to have those difficult conversations with the clients and families. And that is required in order to do this job well.
You know, I've said this to you before, and I can get a little choked up saying this. If, when I took over Compass in 1984, we were this close to going out of business. Our budget was tiny. It was $250,000. In the first 6 months of the year, we had lost $96,000. I mean, we were this close. And I really thought when I became president of Compass in January of '84, we were going to be closed by June. And the fact that the next year you come, we were so close to not making it. And, now, this being our 50th year, and I look at this year so much as a celebration of you and the people who stuck it out. Like, there was a million reasons why you should have abandoned ship. You should have just said, you know what? This is not an ongoing concern here. This is going down the tubes. I got to take care of myself. But you didn't. No. You didn't. So even in those early days, like, why did you stick it out here? I mean, there was no guarantee that you were going to have the most respected community-based service program in all of Eastern Massachusetts. If somebody told you that, you'd say, well, you're out of your mind. That's just not possible. But now, all these years later, they say Margy Nicholson, they say Compass, they go, wow, that's quality.
Thank you.
So why'd you do it? Why'd you stick it out?
I think because I appreciated the trust that was put in me long ago to build this program as I saw fit. When I got out of Boston College, when I graduated, DCF offered me a supervisor position. And I knew then, no, I don't even know if I'm going to be any good at this.
Right.
So
there's self-awareness.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Right.
And so I chose Compass. And I think it was what I could bring to the agency, what I could offer them. And it was a great match. When I think of when we started, we had 28 total families of all 5 of the DCF Boston area offices. I would love
28. How many do you have right now?
As of today, I have 367 families with 30 intakes pending. And I would love to tell you that I had this great master plan for expansion. But it truly was a case of someone from Boston moved to Malden, DCF, knew I lived in Malden, gave me a call and said, Margy, would you be willing to take a couple of cases for us? I said, sure, no problem. Being the control freak that I am, I took the first couple of cases, established the relationship.
Established quality.
And that's how it grew to today when we're in 22 area offices across the state. And it really is because of the quality of the work that I no longer do, but that my staff does. That's what the reputation is based on.
So I think there's something else here besides of who you are, which is a person I love and I think is extraordinary. How have you taken care of yourself? Because most people don't last this long, and most people burn out, and your staff lasts long. What do you do? How do you do this? What's the lesson in this?
I think I tried to focus on the positives and not the negatives. And that is a choice that you make every day. Because I could certainly get depressed or
God,
down.
Look what you're seeing every day.
Exactly.
You're seeing stories of abuse, you're seeing stories of neglect, you're seeing all sorts of horrific stories.
Exactly. I mean, even one of the young boys on that wall over there was one who was...
One of the pictures in your
One
office.
of the pictures was one of those hurt in the Mattapan massacre a couple of years ago, and he'll be in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. So yes, it really is just focusing on the positive and seeing growth, maybe not in the way that other people traditionally judge growth, but to recognize the positive gains that the kids and the families make in non-traditional ways.
You have to have hope.
Always.
I want to take you back to your office when we were in Jamaica Plain, right? So we started in Roxbury, and then eventually we outgrew our space and we went to Jamaica Plain. And we were also in a church building, in a rectory building. And the office was not as nice as this, but it was a pretty cool office.
It was.
So there's a huge difference between this office and that. What is it? The boards.
The boards, yes.
So I always thought that you were a workers' comp claim ready to happen.
I still have the stepladder, Dave.
Because as we expanded, you had a board, and the board had the name of the client, the date of birth, the area office, and the staff member who was working with it. Was there another column? Do I have them all?
Date of intake.
Date of intake.
And then paperwork dates, month to month.
And it worked pretty well.
It did.
When we had our first board, and then we had our second board. But when the board started going up another level, you got a ladder.
I did.
And that was pretty good when it was just one board over another. But when it got to the third and fourth board to the ceiling, And any of us who came in who work with you, I mean, it was really scary.
Yes, it was. For myself, too.
But what was it about? It's about accountability, right?
Yes.
You had to know that no one was going to be left behind.
Exactly.
That I can see that kid's name. I can see when that child got here. I can talk to that child's worker about that child, and he or she was not going to get left behind. I love that.
Right.
I loved it. Of course, computers are here now, so it's a little bit different.
Yes, and I was dragged kicking and screaming
Yeah,
to
of
computers,
course.
as you know,
That's all
because
right.
I thought my system worked pretty well.
It did work well, but Margy, for 400 families,
But we couldn't have done it, and I couldn't figure out how to get those boards up onto the ceiling in a safe way, so that's when I had to acquiesce. But yeah, I remember as if it were yesterday, because do you remember that Bobby Burke, who was the director of community services before me, I walked into his office and he had yellow sticky notes all over the walls of his office. And as someone with a little bit of OCD, that gave me anxiety just looking at that.
Sometimes it makes a good leader, a little OCD.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember being at my parents' dining room table and doing this dry erase board and doing the markings for all of those, columns and the lines this way. People thought I was crazy, but it worked for me. So, and I still have them in that format on the computer on Google Drive, and they are still called Margy's boards. And I will say, it was very impressive when I was talking to collaterals. They would call me and they say, what was the intake date on that? When did you start with them? Who's working with them? Who's the worker? Who's the lead agency? And it appeared to them that I had all of this information just at the top of my head. Little did they know.
Little did they know.
Yes.
So I think one of the things that has made Compass so successful is culture. And you hear it a lot in the workplace, that there's a culture to a place. And it grows over time. So, in some ways we've been lucky. When I left here after I had 26 years total, but 20 leading the organization. When I left here, it was seamless. John Lydon followed me. He had been my number 2. We worked so closely together that really the culture did not change. And then John cultivated Laura, and again, the same thing. We were able to continue the culture. So you've done that too with your successor, right?
Absolutely.
And talk a little bit about that.
Lou Pacheco will be taking over for me as of June 1st. She has worked for me for over 10 years. She worked with me right out of school. She went to school out in Worcester. And a friend of my father's, my husband and I are out to dinner, yells across, Margy, I have someone who just graduated with a degree in social work.
I love it.
Do you have any openings? And I said, Dave, I don't have any openings, but if you want me to interview her just as an informational interview, I will see what I can do. He was a former Medford cop who used to work for my father. So I had Lou come in, and I felt like I was talking to me, a younger version of me. I marched over to John Lydon's office, said, I don't really have space for her right now, but can I hire her, please? And he said, of course. And that was the start. I did.
So there's John's trust in you.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
That your supervisor had trust, not in the budget, but if Margy says she wants to do this, it makes sense.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's the yes part of Compass.
I did lose her to DCF for 7 years. She went to Malden DCF, but it's great experience to have under our belt. If we have a question about a 51A filing for child abuse and neglect, I have no problem deferring to her expertise.
So it's got to feel good for you that you have cultivated somebody who could carry on this work.
Absolutely. And not only just Lou, but also the 9 supervisors who've worked for me for years. When you think about Vanessa Tifa, who will be my program manager, which is a new, when not replacing the assistant director, she started for me 12 years ago as a family specialist. Went back and got her master's degree, went back and got her CAGS, became a family clinician, a program supervisor, and now she'll be running the program with Lou. No, I think that the true mark of my leadership will be what happens after I leave, to make sure that I have put in the time to make sure that, as you say, it's seamless.
It'll keep the culture.
Absolutely. I actually just got...
Yes, respect,
Right.
quality, right? Integrity. All those pieces will continue, Margy,
Absolutely.
after you.
No, I did a report for the board today, and I am including this incredible letter that we received from an intern who just completed an internship with us. And she wrote beautifully about the Compass Way. And when she went through her when she went through her training in September, she didn't know how to define that. And Lou, who did the training, said, I don't know how to describe it either, but you'll know it. Fast forward 9 months later, and she writes, I now know the Compass Way, and in fact, I am Compass. I get goosebumps even thinking about it.
That.
You'll really look forward to reading it as well in the board report.
So retirement, how are you going to spend some time?
Doing nothing up New Hampshire,
good,
I hope.
good.
Reading lots of good books. And I'll figure out the rest in the fall. My entire family is coming. My brother from Ghana, my brother from Ireland, my sister from Montana, from England. We have family all over the world. So I will start with a couple of months of family time and see what's next.
I hope you take the time to let sink in the good work you did.
Thank you.
I really do. I hope that when people say, Margy, look at all you accomplished, you don't go, oh, no. You take it in, because you did.
Thank you.
You did.
I appreciate that.
And
It has truly been my pleasure.
Oh,
I don't have a moment of regret. And as you say, there have been some tough times over the years. 15 years ago, was it, that we laid off 20 of 29 of my staff?
Yeah.
I started carrying cases again. To think now, when you fast forward, I have 70 family specialists, 30 clinicians, 9 supervisors, and just terminated with a dozen interns. That's remarkable. And I don't take all the credit for it, truly. It is a team effort. It's been quite a ride, and I've loved every minute.
Most people would have walked out the door, was 15 or so years ago, and said, no, not for me. Most people would not have taken on a caseload after having been a supervisor. I mean, that's you. I mean, and I've said this before, and I'll say it over and over again. When they put up the Mount Rushmore of Compass, you are on that Mount Rushmore.
Thank you,
You are a person who's really and truly shaped this organization. I'm very proud of you. I'm very thankful that you were in my life. I'm thankful that I work with you. I'm thankful for all you've done. I really am.
Thank you. It's mutual. I can't imagine my life without Compass. And my life with Compass started with you having faith in a young girl with no experience. So I think it was a mutually beneficial decision.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.